Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Jessel Noor in Baltimore. We're continuing our discussion of the very important book, Why Do We Kill? The Pathology of Murder in Baltimore. We're joined again by the book's two authors. We're joined by Kelvin Sewell. He's a Baltimore born and raised 22-year veteran of the Baltimore Police Department. He won many awards and recognitions during his career. He currently serves as the Chief of Police for Pocomoke on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. He's also joined by his co-author, Stephen Janis, longtime award-winning investigative journalist, currently investigative producer with Fox 45. Thanks so much for joining us again.
Thanks for having us.
Nice to be here.
So I wanted to talk about the two cases in the book that personally touched you. Talk about when you discovered the body of Nicole Sesker.
Well, we call it was around 10 o'clock in the morning. We got the call to respond up to Garrison Avenue. It was the body underneath of a porch. And normally, you know, everybody jump in the car, they respond up there from headquarters, you know, trying to get up there before any evidence is lost or whatever. And once we got there, we found the lady Nicole Sesker under the porch of a house in the rear of Garrison Avenue. And at first we didn't know who she was. We didn't know, you know, anything about this young lady. And so what I did was we sectioned off the crime scene like we do with the caution tape, police tape, to make sure nobody entered the area where the investigation is taking place. Once I did that, I wanted to try to identify the body on the scene prior to the body going to the morgue had to conduct the autopsy. So what I did was I brought one young lady to the scene who might have known this individual underneath the porch. And when the young lady I brought to the scene said, "Can you recognize this individual that's deceased here?" The first thing she backed up, put her hand over her mouth and said, that's Commissioner Ham's daughter. Mm. And the first thing I said was, "Commissioner Ham, the police commissioner, a former police commissioner?" Yes. At that point, what I did was I expanded the crime scene because I know once they get out, you know, people are going to be coming from everywhere. So I expanded the crime scene, make sure there was no entry into that alley at all, especially underneath the porch. And we began our investigation, and the hardest thing I had to do was to respond over after we got the body left the scene, respond over to my mentor, Commissioner Ham's house, and let him know that we just found his daughter and she was deceased. I call him my mentor because Commissioner Ham taught me in the academy. When I first joined the police department in 1988, he was my instructor in the academy. And I learned a lot from Commissioner Ham. Even I took up some of his ways of his patrolling the streets of Baltimore. I still remember some of the things he told me today. So he's my mentor, and I learned a lot from him. But just leaving that scene, going to my mentor's house to tell him that we just found his deceased daughter and what had occurred to her, that was one of the most hardest things in my career, because I didn't know how to tell Commissioner Ham, who's my mentor, that your daughter's never coming home again. And I remember going to the house, and we walked into the door. He set us down at the table, and by him knowing where I worked in the police department, Homicide, he knew it was bad from the beginning. And after I explained it to him, he got upset. He was upset about it. Of course, it was his daughter. And afterwards, we discussed the plans of investigating the case with him, and that led to an arrest in that case.
And so Nicole lived a troubled life. She battled with addiction. Talk a little bit about not only her story, Stephen, but in your investigations, other stories you've uncovered similar to Nicole's, and how difficult it is for people similar to Nicole to get justice in our system.
It's interesting. Nicole, first of all, was featured in the New York Times.
Front page
New York Times, because the New York Times reporter encountered her and figured out she was the commissioner's daughter and wrote this very compelling piece about her struggles. She had been, I think, on the streets for like 10 or 12 years. Living a life that's very not unusual for that part of Northwest Baltimore, which is turning tricks for $20, $30, then buying your drugs, and then ending up sleeping somewhere in an abandoned house or under a porch or somewhere. And what happened at that time that really made this case even bigger was that there had actually been 3 other women who had been strangled in very similar situations. And we did a very extensive investigation of that, we found there were 29 cases going back a decade of women who were strangled, who had sort of a similar situation to Nicole, and only 9 of those cases were solved. So I think what you see here with Nicole's type of case, and Nicole eventually made arrest, but not for murder, for assault. So really, they never charged anyone with her murder specifically. What you see with the cases with women in these circumstances is that their cases don't get a lot of attention. It's sort of a, I guess, a phenomenon that Kelvin would describe as like a red ball case versus a case where, you know, if a woman has a record of prostitution or any sort of criminality, the case, I don't think, is a big party, just evidenced by the few numbers of convictions they get. And I end up talking to a lot of women who are in very similar situations. They lead incredibly desperate lives. They're drug addicted, and they're basically forgotten, and they live on the streets by their wits, and they pick up $20, $30 and they're extremely vulnerable. And during that period of time, shortly after Nicole's death, there were 5 cases actually total of women who were strangled, 4 of which there've never been arrests made in any of them. So I think it speaks to this dysfunction we're talking about, where people can commit violence against people who are vulnerable and are never caught.
And so you promised Commissioner Ham, or you told him that you would do your best to get justice for his daughter.
Yes.
And you felt, you wrote in your book, you felt you were prevented from doing that because of politics in the police department. Talk about what happened, because you know, they launched this big task force to help find the killer, but do you feel that justice was ever accomplished? And you know, talk about why you feel that was prevented from happening.
Well, I feel that a lot more could have been done with the detectives that were on the case. I was a supervisor on that case, and I was taken off because of the task force, and the task force took over that investigation. I think that more could have been done, not only with Nicole Sesker's case, but other women cases as well. I didn't think that the detectives gave their 100% in these cases right here. I think if they would have put more effort to these that investigation, I think it would have been a situation where the individual who was charged would have been charged with murder instead of simple assault.
There's one thing I want to add too, that during that period of time, after this came out and they formed the task force and they had 5 cases, and then I went back and we did the stories about the case in the past, they arrested a man named William Vincent Brown, who they found who had killed 2 women and almost killed another back in 2003 and 4, very similar circumstances. The reason that they arrested him is because they finally got around to testing DNA that they found on 2 of the bodies and the woman who had been injured. They had not done anything with that DNA for 5 years, and they were aware that the DNA from the women had matched, but they never run it through the CODIS system or whatever it's called, and found him. So shortly after, you know, the task force was formed, Kelvin was taken off the case. They make this arrest going back 5 years of a person who probably, I would think, it's perfectly possible that he could have killed other people. So it just, the fact that DNA was sitting around for 5 years, that it could have been tested, and I still think there's a possibility it could be tied to other cases in the future, just shows, you know, how the system sometimes doesn't work to the safety of the people.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to have to wrap up this discussion for today, but we're definitely looking forward to having you both back in the studio, because we're only scratched the surface of your book. We want to keep sharing these stories.
Absolutely. We'd love to come back.
Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us at the Real News Network.